The night was cold, the kind of cold that bit deep into the skin and made every breath turn into white smoke. The mountains stretched endlessly, covered in snow and silence. Eli, a thin human boy of 16, moved through the darkness with a small lamp tied to his belt. He was used to the silence, used to the loneliness. Ever since the human colony was destroyed 2 years ago, he had survived alone, finding food, fire, and hope where he could. He had built a small shelter in a cave halfway up the ridge. It wasn't much, just rocks, an old blanket, and a few metal scraps, but it was safe. That night, while returning with melted snow water, he saw something strange near the cliff's edge. It wasn't an animal or a broken drone. It was a faint blue glow. At first, he thought it was the reflection of stars on ice, but then he heard it. A weak, trembling sound. Eli ran closer and froze. There, half buried in snow, was an alien girl. Her skin shimmered with a soft blue light. Her eyes were half open, her breathing shallow. She looked young, maybe his age, but different. Her hair was white like snow and strange marks ran down her cheeks. She was dressed in a torn silver suit, one side burnt. For a moment, Eli didn't move. He had heard stories of aliens before. Some were peaceful, others dangerous. His father had told him before the colony fell, "If you ever see one, don't trust easily." But this one wasn't a threat. She was dying. He dropped his lamp, knelt beside her, and brushed away the snow from her face. Her eyes opened slightly and she whispered something in a language he didn't know. Her voice was soft but desperate. She pointed at her leg, where a metal shard was stuck deep in the flesh. Blood, dark and thick, was freezing in the cold. Eli hesitated only for a second. Then he lifted her into his arms. She was light, almost weightless. The climb back to his cave was slow and painful, but he didn't stop until they reached it. Inside, he laid her near the small fire he had built earlier and covered her with his blanket. She shivered violently. Her strange eyes looked around, filled with confusion. Eli tried to speak slowly. "It's okay. You're safe." She didn't understand the words, but she stared at his face as if trying to read his tone. He pointed at her leg and then at himself. "I'll help." From an old medical kit, he pulled a cloth and a small tool. The shard was deep, but he had treated worse injuries before on himself. He worked carefully, avoiding her gaze. When the shard came out, she gasped and grabbed his arm. Her skin was cold, but glowing faintly. He cleaned the wound, wrapped it tightly, and gave her a few drops of melted snow to drink. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. Then she whispered something again, this time slower. "Thank you." The words were broken but clear enough. Eli froze, shocked. She could speak a little English? He smiled a little, unsure what to say. "You're welcome." She repeated the words softly to herself as if trying to remember them. "You're welcome." Eli sat by the fire, studying her. Up close, she looked both fragile and strong at the same time. Her clothes had marks, symbols etched in gold that looked like part of a military uniform. Around her neck there was a small metal tag with strange letters. He didn't touch it. After a while, her breathing slowed and she fell asleep. Eli leaned back, tired, but he couldn't sleep. He kept staring at the fire, thinking about who she was and where she came from. He had seen many alien ships flying far above the mountains before, but none had ever come this close. Outside, the wind howled, carrying snow against the rocks. But underneath the sound of the storm, Eli heard something else. A low, distant hum, like engines. He stepped out of the cave and looked down the mountain valley. Far below, lights moved across the white fields. Not the lights of stars. Not human lights. They were moving in lines, organized, scanning the snow. He could see faint beams sweeping across the land. His chest tightened. These weren't rescuers. They were hunters. He rushed back inside and looked at the sleeping alien girl. She didn't know yet. She was peaceful, her face calm under the faint blue light of the fire. Eli sat beside her, the metal shard still covered in her blood lying beside him. He whispered to himself, "Who are they after? You, or anyone who helps you?" Outside, the lights kept climbing higher, slowly but surely making their way up the mountain path. Eli grabbed his small rifle and checked the power cell. Only 2 shots left, not enough to fight, but maybe enough to buy time. He looked once more at the girl, then at the dark sky. Something inside him said that helping her was the right thing to do. But another part of him knew. By sunrise, everything was going to change. Morning came slowly over the frozen peaks. The first rays of sunlight touched the snow and made it shine like silver dust. Eli sat near the mouth of the cave, staring at the alien girl. She was awake now, sitting up weakly, her back against the stone wall. Her eyes followed every sound, every movement. She looked frightened but also alert, like someone who had been running for a long time. When Eli offered her a piece of dried fruit, she looked at it curiously, then took a small bite. Her face softened a little. She pointed to herself and said quietly, "Rhina." Her voice was soft but musical. Eli understood it was her name. He nodded. "Eli," he said, tapping his chest. She repeated it, "Eli." For the first time, a small smile appeared on her face, but the peaceful moment didn't last long. Eli noticed something strange on her neck. A dark mark almost burned into her skin. It looked like a symbol, sharp lines forming a circle with a slash through it. He pointed at it, asking silently what it meant. Rena froze, her smile vanished. She touched the mark gently and whispered, "Clan. Mark," her voice trembled. Then through broken words and gestures she tried to explain. Eli learned slowly that Rhina had escaped from her own people, or maybe from a group that claimed to own her. The mark on her neck wasn't just a symbol, it was a sign of control. She drew it on the icy ground with a piece of charcoal, then crossed it out angrily. "Bad," she said. "Hunters. Come." Eli didn't know what kind of hunter she meant, but he remembered the lights he saw last night. They were searching. His stomach tightened. If they found her here, they would find him too. He stood and started packing his small bag. Rena watched him with confusion. He pointed toward the mountains. "We need to move." He made a walking motion with his hands. She shook her head weakly at first, but when she saw his serious eyes, she slowly nodded. They stepped out into the open snow. The wind was sharp and cold, biting at their faces. Rhina moved slowly, still hurt from her leg wound, but she refused to stop. Eli supported her as they climbed up the ridge, leaving deep footprints behind. The world was silent except for the wind, and somewhere far away a faint hum. After a while they reached a narrow ledge where they could see the valley below. Rhina pointed down. Dark shapes were moving across the snow. Dozens of them. Small flying drones hovered above, scanning the ground with red light. Eli pulled her down behind a rock. "They're close," he whispered, even though she couldn't understand his words. He watched through the gap between the stones. The hunters were tall, armored beings, alien soldiers moving with machine precision. Their weapons glowed faintly blue, the same color as Rena's blood. One of them stopped and picked up something from the ground. Eli's heart froze, a piece of cloth. From his cave, Rena gripped his arm tightly. Her eyes were full of fear. "They find us soon," she said in broken English. Eli looked at the steep slope ahead. There was only one way left, through the ice tunnels. He knew them well. As a child, he had explored those frozen passages with his father before the war took everything away. He led her quickly to a crack in the cliff and squeezed inside. The tunnels were dark, the air cold and wet. Their footsteps echoed softly. Rhina used a small glowing stone from her suit to light the way. The light reflected on the ice walls, painting them with blue and white patterns that looked almost alive. After walking for what felt like hours, they reached a large chamber with frozen stalactites hanging from the roof. Rhina stopped to rest, breathing heavily. Eli sat beside her and listened. He could still hear distant sounds, metal footsteps, faint echoes. The hunters were inside the tunnels now, he whispered. "We can't stay here." He motioned for her to follow, but she touched his shoulder. "Wait," she said. Then she pulled something from her wrist, a small device shaped like a band. It flickered with light. She pressed it and a hologram appeared showing a map. A red blinking dot marked their position and many blue dots surrounded them. "Signal. Lost," she said softly. "Can't call home." Eli didn't fully understand, but he saw enough. They were trapped. The hunters were closing in. He looked around, trying to think. Then he noticed one of the tunnels leading upward. Faint light shining at the end. He pointed at it. "There." Rena nodded weakly. They started moving again, climbing through the narrow path, crawling when the ceiling dropped low. Behind them, the sound of footsteps grew louder. A strange voice echoed through the tunnels, harsh and metallic. It called out words Eli didn't understand. But Rhina froze at the sound. Her face went pale. "Leader," she whispered. "He come." Eli didn't ask more. He just pulled her forward. forcing his tired body to move faster. They reached the surface again, the sunlight blinding after the dark tunnels. They stumbled out onto a snowy ridge. Rena collapsed, gasping for air. Eli looked back at the dark tunnel entrance. He could see shadows moving inside, large, fast, and close. He raised his rifle, even though he knew it wouldn't be enough. The mountain wind screamed around them, and somewhere behind the clouds he heard the sound of engines again. The hunters were almost there. Rena looked at him, eyes full of fear and something else. Trust. She whispered one word, her voice breaking through the cold air. Run! Snow swirled around them like a living storm. The wind howled through the cliffs, cutting into their skin. Eli and Rena ran as fast as they could, their feet slipping on the icy path. Behind them came the mechanical hum of alien drones and the sharp echoing clicks of alien voices. Eli didn't dare look back. He knew they were close. He could hear the crunch of metal feet in the snow. Rena's breath came in short, painful gasps. Her wounded leg slowed her down, but she refused to stop. The strange band on her wrist flickered with red light, showing danger signals. Eli grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a steep ravine. "This way," he shouted, though he knew she couldn't understand all his words. Still, she followed him, trusting his voice, trusting the human who had saved her life. They slid down a slope of loose snow and landed near a frozen stream. The world here was quieter, shielded from the wind by high walls of ice. For a moment they rested. Rena leaned against a rock, her face pale. Eli crouched beside her, trying to calm his own heartbeat. He peeked over the ridge. Far above, dark figures moved. The hunters were scanning the area with glowing blue eyes. Their machines floated through the sky, searching for heat signatures. Rena pointed upward and whispered, "They stays warm." She mimed fire and then slashed her hand through the air, shaking her head. No fire, Eli understood. If they used fire to stay warm, they'd be seen instantly. The cold was deadly, but being found was worse. They continued moving along the frozen stream deeper into the mountains. The path became narrow and sharp, with walls of ice rising like glass towers. The silence was heavy, broken only by their footsteps and the distant echo of drones. After a while, Rena stopped and touched her wristband again. The holographic map flickered faintly. "Here," she said. "Old path. Safe." She pointed toward a dark opening between two cliffs, a tunnel leading into the mountain's heart. Eli hesitated. "You sure?" She nodded weakly. "My people. Used long ago." It was risky, but they had no choice. They stepped inside. The tunnel was narrow, with walls covered in frost and strange carvings. Rena traced the symbols gently with her hand. "Ancient way," she whispered, almost to herself. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The air grew colder, heavier. Eli's breath fogged in front of his face. Then he heard it, a faint metallic noise behind them. He turned his head. A drone had found the entrance. "Go!" he shouted. They ran through the twisting tunnel, the echo of their steps bouncing off the icy walls. The drone's red light flickered in the distance, scanning wildly. Rena stumbled, and Eli caught her before she hit the ground. He turned, aimed his small rifle, and fired. The shot echoed like thunder. The drone exploded into a burst of sparks, lighting up the tunnel, but that light also gave away their position. A loud roar followed, the sound of alien engines approaching. Eli knew they had only seconds. He pulled Rena into a narrow side passage, just as plasma bolts burned through the tunnel behind them. The ice melted where the shots hit, steam filling the air. Rena's hands trembled as she pressed something on her wristband again. A faint blue barrier shimmered around them for a moment before fading. "Shield. Broken," she said with a hopeless sigh. Eli looked at her and tried to smile. "Don't give up yet." They kept crawling through the narrow passage until it opened into a wide cavern. It was huge, the ceiling lost in shadows. Old human mining equipment lay buried under the ice, rusted and forgotten. Rena looked around, amazed. "Humans here?" she asked softly. Eli nodded. "Long time ago. Before the war." In one corner of the cavern stood a broken metal tower. Eli climbed up partway and looked out through a crack in the ceiling. He could see the valley far below. The hunters were spreading out in all directions, 30 of them. Each one armed, scanning, hunting. He climbed back down. "We can't fight them," he said quietly. "We hide." Rena's eyes narrowed. "Hide? No work?" "They find, always find." Eli didn't argue. He could see the fear behind her words. Not just fear of dying, but fear of being captured again. He didn't know what they'd done to her before she escaped, but he could imagine. Suddenly a sound came from above, a heavy metallic thud. Then another. The ice ceiling cracked slightly, snow falling in thin streams. They were landing nearby. Eli grabbed Rhina's hand and pulled her behind a fallen beam. The footsteps came closer, echoing through the cavern. He could hear their voices, deep, rough, speaking in a strange rhythm. Rhina whispered, "Leader." Her whole body shook. Through a crack in the ice, Eli saw him, the alien commander. Taller than the others, armor shining black with red streaks. His face was hidden behind a mask that glowed faintly. He was scanning the cavern with a weapon in his hand. The commander bent down, touching the melted ice where the drone had exploded. Then he looked up sharply. He knew someone had been here. Eli tightened his grip on his rifle. His heart raced. Rhina looked at him, eyes wide, whispering, "Please." "Don't fight," but Eli didn't answer. He looked at her, then at the shadow moving closer. The commander was only a few meters away now. Eli's finger rested on the trigger. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let them take her. Not alive. The icy air inside the cavern was still, broken only by the slow echoing footsteps of the alien commander. His armor gleamed with faint red light, reflecting off the walls like a silent warning. Each step sounded like thunder to Eli's ears. He held his breath, pressing himself and Rhina deeper behind the fallen beam. Her trembling hand gripped his arm tightly, her heartbeat racing fast enough for him to feel it. The alien commander stopped near the center of the cavern. He bent down, touching the cracked ice where Eli's rifle shot had melted part of the wall. He spoke in his harsh language, his voice deep and commanding. The other raiders answered instantly, spreading out to search every corner. Eli's mind raced. He had nowhere to go, nowhere to hide if they came closer. The cavern's entrance was behind the raiders, and the tunnel they had used was now filled with broken ice. They were trapped. Then something fell from the upper wall near a chunk of frozen metal. It hit the ground with a sharp clang. Every alien turned their heads toward the sound. Eli froze, but then he realized something. The noise had come from the far side of the cavern, not near them. The raiders began moving toward it, thinking someone was there. Rhina's eyes widened as she looked at Eli. He had thrown a small metal bolt without making a sound. A tiny trick, but it worked. When the raiders moved away, Eli whispered, "Now." They crawled out from behind the beam and slipped between two slabs of rock, their movements slow and quiet. Eli led her through a narrow crack that led upward, a hidden passage he had noticed earlier. The climb was hard, the ice sharp and slippery. Rhina struggled, her leg wound reopening slightly. But Eli helped her, refusing to stop. Below them, the aliens were still searching, unaware that their targets were climbing above. After several minutes, they reached a ledge that opened into a long ice tunnel glowing faintly blue. The light came from crystals buried in the walls, ancient and mysterious. Rhina stopped to catch her breath, leaning against the ice. Eli checked his rifle again. Only one shot left. Suddenly, a loud metallic voice echoed from below. The commander had found something, Rhina's dropped wristband. Eli peeked down through a small hole in the ice and saw him holding it up. The holographic map flickered on, revealing their trail. The commander roared. The sound was like a beast's cry, shaking the air. "The other raiders began climbing fast. Weapons ready, go!" Eli shouted, pulling Rhina forward. They ran through the tunnel, the ice crunching beneath their boots. Behind them came the sound of pursuit. Heavy, fast, unstoppable. Plasma bolts flew past, melting parts of the walls. The tunnel shook, pieces of ice falling around them like rain. They burst out into the open, onto a wide cliff that overlooked a massive drop. The view was breathtaking. Endless mountains and a valley covered in fog. But there was no time to admire it. The wind was fierce, almost pushing them off the edge. Across the cliff was a narrow, frozen bridge connecting to another peak. It was old, cracked, and dangerously thin. Rhina stared at it, terrified. "It break," she said. Eli looked at the raiders charging behind them, their glowing eyes bright in the storm. "It's our only way." He stepped onto the bridge first, testing the ice. It creaked but held. He turned and reached for her hand. "Trust me." Rhina hesitated for only a second before taking his hand. They moved carefully, step by step. The bridge swayed under their weight. The wind screamed louder, carrying snow and shards of ice that cut at their faces. Halfway across, a plasma bolt struck the bridge near the base. It cracked loudly. Rena screamed. The ice under her foot broke and she slipped. Eli dropped his rifle and grabbed her arm just in time. Her legs dangled over the deep void below. She looked up at him, panic in her glowing eyes. Eli! He gritted his teeth and pulled with all his strength. The bridge groaned, threatening to shatter completely. For a moment, time stood still. Then he hauled her up and pushed her toward the other side. Just as they reached the end, another shot hit the bridge. The entire structure collapsed behind them, falling into the abyss. The sound echoed for a long time before fading away. They fell onto the snow, panting, exhausted. Rena turned to him, tears in her eyes. You save me again. Eli nodded, trying to catch his breath. Let's not make a habit of it. But their moment of relief didn't last. From across the gap, the commander stood at the cliff edge, staring at them. His glowing mask was unreadable, but his rage was clear. He raised a communicator to his mouth and gave an order. Moments later, several ships appeared in the sky, dark, sharp, and deadly. They began circling above, searching for a landing zone. Reina's face went pale. They call more. Eli looked around. They couldn't climb higher. The storm above was too strong. But he noticed something strange in the distance. A faint metal structure buried in the snow, half covered by ice. It looked old, human-made. He pointed toward it. That way. Reina hesitated. What is it? Eli didn't answer. He just helped her stand. Maybe our only chance. They stumbled through the storm, snow whipping around them as the alien ships descended from the clouds. Behind them, the commander watched, silent, patient, knowing that this hunt was far from over. The wind screamed across the mountain, carrying ice and dust like tiny knives. Eli pulled Reina close as they struggled toward the metal shape buried in the snow. The storm was growing worse, the air so cold it burned to breathe. Above them, alien ships circled like predators, their blue lights cutting through the fog. When they finally reached the structure, Eli realized what it was. An old human outpost, half destroyed and frozen in time. Rusted panels, broken antennas, and a cracked door stood half open. The words, Station 09 Aurora Watch, were barely visible under layers of frost. Eli pushed the door hard, and it creaked open. Inside was darkness, thick and heavy. He turned on his small light. The walls were lined with machinery and crates. Everything was covered in frost, but it was shelter. Finally, some shelter. Reina limped inside, shivering. She looked around, touching the strange metal walls. Human base? She asked softly. Eli nodded. Old one, from before the fall. He guided her to a broken chair and helped her sit. Then he looked around for supplies. The shelves were empty, the control panels dead. But at the far end of the room, he saw a power terminal, half buried in ice. He knelt beside it and brushed off the frost, his fingers numb from the cold. He whispered, "Come on, still something left in you." He pressed a few buttons and the screen flickered weakly to life. Faded lights glowed along the walls, bringing the room to a dim, ghostly brightness. For the first time, Reina could see everything. The human posters still hanging crooked on the walls, the frozen meal packs, the control seats covered in dust. She stared at it all in silence. You people build this? Eli smiled faintly. We built everything. Once. Her glowing eyes softened. Then, why alone? He didn't answer right away. He stared at the flickering lights, remembering faces, his father, his mother, the day the colony burned. Because we trusted the wrong people, he finally said. Before she could ask more, a loud sound echoed from outside, a deep thump that shook the ground, then another. They both looked toward the open door. Eli grabbed his rifle. They found us. Rena stood slowly, her legs still weak. She touched her neck mark unconsciously. He come. Eli moved to the door and peeked out. Through the storm, dark figures appeared, the raiders climbing fast through the snow, led by the same tall commander. Their armor lights cut through the fog like blue fire. Eli turned back and whispered, "We can't run anymore." Rhina's hand went to her wristband, but it only flickered. No signal, no power. She looked hopeless. But Eli had an idea. "This station has defense systems," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Old ones. Maybe still works." He ran to the main console and started pressing buttons. The screen glowed weakly, showing old systems offline. "Come on," he muttered. "Dad showed me how these things work." Suddenly, a deep hum filled the air. The walls vibrated slightly. Ancient turrets on the outer walls flickered to life, their lights turning red. Rhina's eyes widened. "You activate weapon." Eli nodded. "If it still shoots, maybe we have a chance." Outside, the raiders approached fast. The first one reached the outpost door, and the turret above it fired. The explosion lit up the snow like daylight. Rhina covered her ears as the thunder echoed across the mountain. Two more turrets came alive, firing plasma bursts in all directions. The alien soldiers scattered, shouting orders in their language. The commander raised his arm and pointed toward the outpost. A huge plasma blast shot from his weapon, hitting the wall. The station shook violently, snow falling from the ceiling. Rhina stumbled. Eli caught her and pulled her behind a control desk. "Stay down!" he shouted, through the small crack in the wall. He could see the turrets glowing hotter, firing nonstop. But they were old, overloading fast. Sparks flew, smoke filled the air, and one turret exploded in flames. Rhina grabbed Eli's arm. "They break through soon," he nodded grimly. He looked around desperately for anything that could help. Then he saw it, a lever covered in frost labeled Main Power Core. Underneath, a warning read, "Manual override, authorized personnel only." He ran to it. "If we give the core more power, it'll fry the system, but it'll take them all out." Rhina stared at him. "Take you too?" Eli hesitated. "Maybe." She shook her head, stepping closer. "No. You save me. I save you." Her glowing eyes met his. "We live." But before he could reply, the wall burst open. The commander stepped inside, his armor burning from the storm, weapon aimed. His voice was low and metallic. "Return the traitor." Eli stood between them. "You'll have to go through me." The commander tilted his head. "Human, foolish." He fired. The plasma bolt hit Eli's shoulder, throwing him to the ground. Pain burned through him, but he forced himself up. Grabbing a broken metal rod, Rhina screamed something in her language, a word that made the commander pause for half a second. That was all Eli needed. He pulled the lever. The outpost roared to life. Every light turned red. Alarms screamed, and the ground began to shake. A wave of blinding energy shot outward, exploding through the snow, tearing through the alien soldiers like fire. Rhina shielded Eli as the storm swallowed everything. When the light faded, the mountain was silent again. Smoke rose from the ruins, and only the wind remained. Rhina knelt beside Eli, who was breathing weakly but alive. She whispered, voice shaking, "You crazy human." Eli smiled faintly, eyes half open. "Yeah, they say that about us." Outside, the wreckage of the alien ships burned like fallen stars. Snow still fell over the ruined outpost, but the mountain was quiet now. Too quiet. Smoke rose from the shattered walls, glowing faintly in the dying firelight. The air smelled of burnt metal and frozen ash. Eli sat against a wall, his shoulder wrapped in a piece of torn cloth. The plasma wound burned deep, but he was alive. Rhina knelt beside him, cleaning the injury with melted snow. Her hands shook slightly, though whether from cold or fear he couldn't tell. "Stay still," she said softly. Her English was getting better, the words broken but gentle. He smiled weakly. "You sound human." Rhina tilted her head, not understanding the joke, but her lips curved into a faint smile anyway. "Human, strong," she said. Eli laughed quietly, though the pain made it come out as a gasp. He looked around the room. The station's power core still hummed faintly. Despite the explosion, some of the old systems were alive. Red warning lights blinked along the walls. Outside, the storm raged harder, covering the dead raiders in a blanket of white. "We bought some time," he said, "but not enough." Rena's expression darkened. "He not stop, Commander. Always finish hunt." Eli looked at her carefully. "Why is he hunting you, Rina?" She hesitated. Her eyes lowered to the floor, and for a long time, she didn't speak. Finally, she whispered, "Because I say no." Eli frowned. "No to what?" Rina looked up, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "War." Her voice trembled as she explained. Her people, the Kareth, were preparing to conquer other worlds. They had enslaved smaller races, taken planets one after another. Rina was a diplomat's daughter trained to follow orders, but when she learned of their plans to invade human space, she refused to help. Her father tried to protect her, but the ruling council marked her as a traitor. The hunters were sent to bring her back, alive or dead. Eli listened in silence. Every word hit him hard. He had always thought humans were the hunted ones, the survivors. Now he realized. This girl had risked everything to stop a war that would have destroyed his kind. When she finished, she said softly, "I run to warn humans. But ship crash. You find me." He looked at her, the truth sinking in. "So you came for us?" Rina nodded. "Yes, but maybe too late." Eli stood slowly, ignoring the pain. "Then we make it not too late." He moved to the console again, pressing a few buttons. The old screen flickered, showing weak signals. "There's a transmitter buried under the ice. If I can get it working, maybe we can send a message to orbit. Someone might still be listening." Rina frowned. "Humans gone?" "Maybe," he said quietly. "But maybe not. Maybe some are still out there." She watched him for a moment, then moved beside him. "Then we send message together." They worked side by side, clearing ice from the console and reconnecting old wires. Sparks flew once, and the smell of burning filled the air, but Eli didn't stop. His fingers were numb, but determination kept him moving. Hours passed. The storm outside grew louder, the wind howling like an angry beast. Every now and then they heard distant explosions, signs that not all raiders had been destroyed. Finally, the console beeped. A faint, static-filled signal appeared on the screen. Eli smiled. "It's working!" Rina's eyes widened. "You did it." But before they could celebrate, a new sound echoed from outside, deep, rhythmic, and heavy. Rina's face turned pale. "No." Eli turned toward the shattered door. In the fog, something massive moved. A ship, black and shaped like a blade, descending through the clouds. It wasn't the small scout craft from before. It was the commander's warship. Rina grabbed Eli's arm. "He come back." Eli clenched his fists. "Then we finish this." He looked at the transmitter again, then at her. "We'll send that signal, and we'll hold them off until it reaches someone." Rina stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief. "You fight again?" "You hurt," he smirked. "Humans don't stop just because it hurts." Rina said nothing, but something in her expression changed. Fear mixed with admiration. She picked up a fallen plasma rifle from one of the dead raiders and powered it up. "Then I fight too." Eli grinned, blood dripping from his arm. "Good. Let's show them what happens when you corner humans." Outside, the commander's ship landed with a crash that shook the mountain. The wind roared and snow fell from the cliffs. Dozens of armored raiders stepped out, weapons glowing. Their leader stood in front, eyes locked on the outpost. Inside, two figures stood side by side, a wounded human and a hunted alien girl, ready to face an army. Eli whispered, "If they want a war, they just found one." The mountain was alive with thunder. Plasma fire lit up the stormy sky as the alien commander's warship hovered above the cliffs, its engines shaking the frozen ground. The air burned with blue light, the sound of energy weapons echoing through the canyons. Inside the shattered outpost, Eli and Rina stood behind what was left of the control desk. The transmitter hummed faintly, its signal still weak but pulsing into the cold night sky. The air around them smelled of smoke and ozone. Eli's arm ached from the wound, but he ignored it. He watched through a broken wall as the alien soldiers spread out, surrounding the station. "They're not taking us alive," he said, voice steady despite the exhaustion. Rena loaded the plasma rifle she had taken earlier. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were fierce. Then we make them regret coming. Eli smiled faintly. Now you sound human. Outside, the commander raised his hand, giving a silent signal. The raiders charged forward, their boots thundering on the frozen ground. Plasma bolts cut through the snow, leaving trails of fire. Eli ducked behind the metal wall as the shots hit, sparks flying everywhere. Keep them busy, he shouted. I'll boost the signal. Rena nodded and leaned out from behind the desk, firing quick bursts toward the advancing soldiers. The weapon hissed, spitting light across the field. Several raiders fell, their armor melting from the blast. But for every one that fell, 2 more appeared. Eli tore open a control panel, sparks flying as he reconnected ancient wires. The transmitter's glow brightened for a second, then faded again. No, come on, he muttered, slamming the side of the console. Outside, Reina's shots grew slower. She ducked behind the wall again, panting. The plasma rifle's core glowed dangerously hot. It overheat, she warned. Eli didn't look up, just hold them off a little longer. The commander stepped through the smoke, his massive frame outlined by the ship's searchlights. His armor glowed with faint red lines, and his mask reflected the firelight like a demon's face. He moved slowly, deliberately, unbothered by the chaos around him. Rena saw him and froze. Her hand trembled on the rifle. He come, Eli looked up from the console. Then we stop him here. The commander raised his weapon and fired. The blast tore through the wall, knocking Rena backward. She hit the floor hard, her rifle skidding away. Eli ran to her side, shouting her name, but before he could reach her, the commander stepped inside the outpost. Human, the deep, metallic voice rumbled. You fight for nothing. Eli turned to face him. Maybe, but I don't fight alone. He lunged toward the old power lever again, the same one that had saved them before. The commander fired, hitting the wall inches away. The blast threw Eli off balance, but he kept crawling toward the console. Rena, coughing, reached for her rifle and fired one desperate shot. The plasma bolt hit the commander's shoulder, burning through part of his armor. The alien roared in pain, spinning toward her. He raised his weapon, but Eli slammed his hand down on the power lever. The outpost screamed to life again. The core, damaged from before, began to overload. Lights flashed red. The sound of energy building filled the air like a heartbeat. The commander realized too late what Eli had done. Foolish human, he shouted, rushing forward. Eli stood his ground, blood dripping from his arm. Yeah, he said through a weak grin. That's what they call us. The explosion was blinding. A surge of white light burst from the core, ripping through the walls, through the snow, through everything. The mountain shook like it was alive. The alien ship above cracked in two, fire spilling from its engines. The commander's roar vanished in the blast. When the light faded, silence returned. Snow fell gently, covering the ruins. The warship lay burning in the valley below. The storm was finally ending. Rena opened her eyes slowly. The world was quiet. She crawled through the debris, coughing, calling softly, Eli? For a moment, there was no answer. Then through the smoke, she saw him, lying near the broken console, barely conscious but alive. She ran to him, tears freezing on her cheeks. You live, she whispered. Eli smiled weakly. Told you, we don't die easy. She laughed through her tears, shaking her head. Crazy human. Above them, the transmitter sparked once more, and then a faint voice came through the static. Unidentified human signal detected. This is Fleet Command, respond. Rena looked at the speaker, her eyes wide with disbelief. They hear us. Eli managed a tired grin. Guess your message got through. Minutes later, the clouds above parted and a group of silver ships appeared, human ships marked with old Earth emblems. They descended slowly, their lights cutting through the fading storm. Rena helped Eli to his feet as the first rescue ship landed nearby. He looked at her, his voice weak but sure. You saved me, you know, she smiled softly. We save each other. As the humans stepped out of their ships, weapons ready, Rena looked up at the sky. Now they know. Not all aliens are enemy, Eli nodded, and not all humans are gone. The wind quieted. The snow settled, and for the first time in a long while, the mountains were calm. High above, a small piece of metal drifted down, the broken insignia from the commander's armor, landing gently near Eli's boot. He looked at it for a moment, then turned away. The war was over for now. But in that frozen silence, one truth was clear. Humanity had not been erased. They had been waiting, and now they were coming back.